The other day, I got a classic PMO press release saying, quote, Prime Minister Stephen Harper today announced that he will meet with Dr. Thomas Boni Yayi, President of the Republic of Benin and Chairperson of the African Union. Right, I thought, as if he could find Benin on a map without being briefed. But it turns out Benin isn't the real problem, Mali is. The press release went on as you'd expect. Benin is a democratic African partner that continues to make impressive progress in the areas of economic and institutional reform while promoting regional stability, said Prime Minister Harper. And I was thinking, well, at least he didn't use the word vibrant. But surprisingly, in this case, the standard boilerplate is true. Benin, which was a brutal Marxist dictatorship until 1990, has become a multi-party democracy with some hopeful signs economically and in their fight against corruption. But I digress. Is the problem, despite the flurry of PMO press releases about good things happening between Canada and Benin, is that President Boni Yayi is mostly here as chairperson of the African Union. And according to that same press release, in just 1 year as AU chair, President Boni Yayi has led the response of his organization to coup d'etat in Mali and Guinea-Bissau, the ongoing crisis in northern Mali, escalating conflicts in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, and most recently in the Central African Republic. Yikes! That's a heap of trouble, even for an organization more robust than the African Union. And you can't blame him for wanting help. But you can just say no to Mali, which is currently the most acute crisis. Okay, to begin with, if you're having trouble finding it on a map, Google Timbuktu, then pan out. Second, while the name may invoke exotic unreality, Timbuktu is a real place in the depths of an enormous landlocked stretch of African desert battled over by jihadis and an incompetent, undemocratic regime. And while it's wretched that Islamist fanatics are killing people and trashing World Heritage sites you never heard of there, let's do a little reconnaissance before shouldering our packs and trudging past Fort Zinderneuf, which would supposedly be in Niger, to Bamako and beyond. For third, Mali is the bit of West Africa looking vaguely like a raptor's open mouth west of Niger, east of Mauritania, and northwest of Burkina Faso. So, yes, it's a bit hard to get there, and even harder to get around once you arrive. At 1.24 million square kilometers, Mali is the 24th largest country on Earth. It's bigger than Germany, France, and Italy combined. It's endless stretches of inhospitable desert sand and broken mountains. It contains one railway that's less than 750 kilometers long, fewer than 5,000 kilometers of paved roads, and just 1.6% of the surface is water, and yet the tropical south floods in the rainy season. It has 15 million people and no GDP. Okay, guesses of its GDP range from about $10 to $18 billion. That's 1/100th of Canada's. So with all due respect to President Boni Yayi, the proposal to send a few hundred Canadian troops to patrol it is not a slam dunk. Okay, to be sure, formally, we're not currently being asked to patrol. We're just meant to help other Western nations train the locals to be like us. They may not want that. Mali is one of the last places on Earth with large-scale slavery, apparently with considerable popular support. As many as 200,000 people there are still slaves. Ex-slaves suffer terrible discrimination, and as in the 2012 Tuareg rebellion, their former owners often try to grab them back given half a chance. Now, this truth is only whispered with respect to Afghanistan because conservatives don't want to tarnish our troops' performance and progressives don't want to admit culture matters. But training Afghan security forces, as though their main problems were technical ones like literacy or radio repair, has not worked because too many Afghans are Islamists. And so are too many people in Mali, and too many others there hold scarcely less appalling beliefs and habits, equally incompatible with prosperity and human dignity. If that's too harsh a truth, at least please let's beware of the logistics. Mali is half the size of Western Europe, landlocked, arid, and impassable. So what exactly is it that we hope to do there besides feel good? Briefly. Don't ask the Harper administration, which is characteristically firm but flexible on the subject. Spokesman for Foreign Minister John Baird and the PMO insist, and I quote, Canada is not contemplating a military mission in Mali, end quote. But PMO spokesman says Canada is looking at ways to implement the UN Security Council resolution seeking support to regional and international efforts that apparently include 3,300 African troops seizing back 600,000 square kilometers of Saharan wasteland from the Islamists. And Foreign Minister Baird told QMI's Jessica Murphy, and I quote, Canada will be reflecting on what role we can play, end quote, which of course could mean anything, nothing, or both. But if you commit to helping fix such a mess, even in small ways, it's hard to back out as things deteriorate. Now, the president of Benin has asked for a NATO mission. And on December 30th, Defense Minister Peter MacKay speculated that helping train Mali's army officers was something Canadian forces are, quote, particularly adept at doing, end quote. Bosh! Nobody is particularly adept at training Mali's squalid army, with the Globe and Mail rather delicately noted its, quote, history of political aggressiveness, human rights abuses, chaotic command structures, and resistance to Western training, compounded by its uneasy alliance with revenge-minded militia groups. Yeah. Awkwardly, one graduate of America's military training program in Mali staged a coup last March and remains a powerful political figure. So, the European Union apparently does intend to send 250 military trainers to seek similar triumphs, and we're being offered a seat on that plane with no return ticket. Sorry, President Boni Yayi. Congratulations on what's happening in your own country, and good luck with your neighbors. But we know a slippery slope when we see one, and we do not like what's at the bottom of this one.
The Government of Canada is not considering a direct Canadian military mission. What we are doing and will continue to do, obviously we're providing humanitarian aid to this region, which is important. And we are consulting with and working with and will continue diplomatically with our allies in the West and obviously with our friends in Africa on ways that we can be of assistance.
And there's one of those reassurances from the Prime Minister that is far too nebulous to be of any use to us. So Mali, if a quagmire can be dry, then Mali's a quagmire, and I don't think we should go there. The problem is the Islamist threat, a failed state, could be a problem. I'm joined now by David Harris of Insignia Strategic Research here in Ottawa. What do you think? Is Mali the wrong fight in the wrong place, or do we need to try and do something because we can't have another failed state?
Well, it may ultimately force itself upon us. The problem is its sheer complexity, as you say, the morass, if a dry morass. We have a situation that once it seemed promising in Mali, some hope of democracy, a plausible constitution, but then followed, of course, by the disruption of a coup within about the last year. That's what complicates the backdrop. In effect, the coup leaders, who have been objected to for good reason by any number of countries, are the good guys in this struggle, and the bad guys are the monstrous representatives of those who would associate themselves, at least in general, with Al-Qaeda and its values. We're hearing about, of course, their enthusiasm for amputations as punishments and all the sorts of things that would even make perhaps a few Saudi extremist imams blush. So it's a dire situation. It looks as though it could be heading in the direction of Yemen, of Somalia, and sure enough, as consolidated enemy territories, and that's what they are relative to Canada and the West, they present real threats. If Mali goes in that direction, it could be the same thing. And we remember where that kind of thing can lead. After all, I've more or less just described, in effect, what we saw in Afghanistan under the Taliban as they were in their plotting and scheming, sealing the fate of the World Trade Center and any number of thousands of North Americans. So yes, at some point we may very well be forced to make some kind of contribution. One hopes it would be a fairly limited one, but for the moment things are very much up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, if you believe in responsibility to protect and you think simply oppression of people in a place is grounds for intervention, then you have grounds. But if you're worried about, are they a threat to us? Is Mali an effective base? I mean, it's got pretty horrendous communications, far worse than Yemen, on the other hand. So did Afghanistan. But the other problem, you're looking at a place where the Malian army, which obviously can't fight, though it can terrorize people, may have as few as 6,000 troops. The African Union is going to send another 3,300. I mean, 10,000 ineffective soldiers? I mean, even if it matters, can we do it?
That's right. And look at the landscape. We're talking very roughly, what, territory the size perhaps of France.
It's bigger than France, Germany, and Italy put together. I looked it up.
There we are. And when you think also, too, about communication, I mean, the fact is the possibility of communication have been demonstrated as we've seen so much in the way of weaponry and personnel moving from Libya and thereabouts into Mali. So I guess we shouldn't underestimate the possibilities attending this kind of situation.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, I mean, there's going to be trouble somewhere in the world. If anybody has the idea that we could arrange affairs in the next decade so there was nowhere jihadis controlled where they could train bad guys, I'll visit that planet someday and enjoy my stay. So if they're going to be, I mean, if there's any place we're not going to go, isn't it Mali? I mean, just it's so hopeless. It's not actually where Fort Zinderneuf was meant to be. Fort Zinderneuf was next door in Niger, but that's the terrain. No roads, no railways, no water, no nothing. If they got to be anywhere, isn't this a good place for them?
Well, you know, this is the challenge, isn't it? It's a highly complicated situation. I go back to that Afghani analogy and where those things can lead. But it is the simple and hard fact that we've got to preserve and husband our resources. By our, I'm talking about the West in general. We've ruined ourselves financially, economically. I mean, just look at the Canadian debt for starters. And so now we are highly constrained in what it is we are able to do. And as the art of the possible and our basic self-defense interests becomes more constricted, we've really got to make the tough choices. And it's not clear that in the near term Mali is quite the right choice.
Yeah, and one of the tough choices, I mean, you know, I'm not a huge Barack Obama fan, but one thing I think he's got right is the use of drones to take out militant leaders. And of all the places where maybe you'd rather have drones, and I realize this will do nothing for the people there, but maybe this is one place we do want push-button warfare, not boots on the ground.
Well, it can make a lot of sense that it has had some demonstrated value where you've had concentrations of enemy and, needless to say, very senior personnel. To that effect, it's not necessarily victory we should ever particularly be after in some of these struggles as much as the countering, the disrupting of enemy forces and groups. That's no small achievement in and of itself. It keeps the pot boiling among the enemy and at least keeps them from our throats in the very near term.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that. I mean, again, I was in the monologue, I mentioned this. Mali has something like 200,000 slaves. There's maybe 800,000 ex-slaves who are very harshly discriminated against in all parts of the country. What would victory look like there beyond what you specify of not having them leap for our throats and reach them?
That's it. It's ill-defined, undefined, and maybe impossible to designate. And we've got to be honest about that. We've also got to be honest about the so-called responsibility to protect, the very great limits upon that, obviously, when economics and military resources are limited. But we really have got to put ourselves and keep ourselves in the real world. We have very great interests, and we are going to increasingly be finding at home that we're facing a very definite terror threat. We're also dealing with subversion of a somewhat more subtle, radical kind of nature, as recent CSIS reports that have been released have very clearly indicated. So if we don't keep some of our reserves with us and tightly held, we may find ourselves in for an unpleasant surprise.
Okay, so Mali, let's not rush in. Thanks very much, David Harris of Insignis Research here in Ottawa.